So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the August 8th, 2023 Zoning Review Committee meeting. This meeting is being conducted remotely online through the Zoom meeting app, and public participation is encouraged through the app or by phone. This is in accordance with the extension of COVID pandemic provisions, allowing remote public meetings by the General Court through March 31st, 2025, per Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. We have two items on the agenda. We're going to take the second one first, since Judy is with us, and that would be to discuss priorities for housing related zoning bylaw sections, multifamily, open space, residential development that prioritize shared and usable open space in order to provide directions for amendments. So Judy, with that, I will turn it over to you.
So I think what would be helpful to me to know is, what do you want to do? Because you've got options for how to make your multifamily and open space bylaws more productive in terms of providing housing choices and also addressing kind of open space by design. But I guess we need to know what you want to accomplish if you're going to change the zoning that you have, which, you know, we think you need to do, but we need to know what you want to accomplish.
Well, let's run around the board and see what everyone has to offer. Eric, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Well, so Judy, these were two of the items that you folks had identified as challenges for us.
Yeah.
And when I look at those, I certainly agree that having them go in front of town meeting is particularly troublesome. And I don't think that that's the way that we want to go long term. I don't know that we want to go and radically change everything to say we want to now have lots of multifamily and really cut into open space. But perhaps it could be as simple as just saying, look, it falls under special permit with the planning board like everything else, and that it really doesn't need to go through town meeting.
Right.
When I looked at it, and said, gee, maybe we take that interim step and remove that, what seems to be somewhat outdated barrier. And then, longer term, we have to look at what our multifamily housing and certainly the MBTA communities plays into that. And we need to look at our housing plan and a variety of other things. But I looked at it as perhaps doing it in phases.
Mm-hmm.
First, remove the town meeting component to that,
Mm-hmm.
and then look at, how we might handle it differently overall.
Okay.
Larry, your thoughts?
So I absolutely agree that having multifamily housing, trying to get that through a town meeting doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. But I believe the town should maintain as much control as it possibly can over where these things go and if they can exist at all. And I understand that we are required to have zoning for so many of them, but my kind of point throughout the past several meetings has been, we only need zoning. We don't, that zoning doesn't need to be anywhere where these things could actually get built, or at least not right away. And if the town does want multifamily housing at some point, it can always add options and avenues for builders. So this is something that the town can make easier at any point in time, but may not be able to make harder at some point in time, or it might be too late. So as much control as we can keep as far as where these go and how hard it is, the more control we can keep, the better. That's my personal thought.
Thank you, Larry. Joe? You're muted. Joe, you're muted.
Sorry,
There we go.
I hit the button. I agree with everything that Mr. Clausen said. I think if we can show that the definitions and clarify the existing law and examine where the locations could be for our own future growth, regulatory growth as far as 40B, where they may or may not be allowed, that actually can make some more controls, and also the MBTA community. So if we can clarify our existing wording and then actually make sure that it's coincides with our current zoning maps as an update, so that people have a visual and know where it is and know what the complexity would be and know how many units and what density would be, may be very helpful before going before the town meeting. That's it.
I kind of agree with all the sentiments that we've heard this evening. And I agree with Eric that we need to take this one step at a time and not try and do too much at once. Planning board, which this would fall under, they are elected officials. They should have the ability to decide what needs to go in and the scope of it and so forth. So I guess, Judy, if that's any help to you, that to at least remove the ability of town meeting to have to approve every step along the way, which it kind of is sort of the way it's written now.
Yeah.
I guess my concern is we would need to do it in a way that it doesn't appear to the town that we're taking away any rights to the individuals of the town from town meeting approval. I think there's some concern across the country that we're losing our individual rights here and there, and we want to make sure that this doesn't appear to be some sort of a grab by the government of the town. So I hope that gives you some guidance as to what we're looking for.
Mr. Chair, if I might also add one thing, perhaps Judy and Bob can provide some clarity, is it did sound like there might be some challenges from the state relative to our bylaws and existing changes, and that these two items requiring town meeting approval might actually be called out by the Attorney General when they review our bylaws. So I guess my question is the requirement that multifamily development and the open space pieces requiring town meeting, is that perhaps either with case law or mass general law, are we potentially running afoul of that already, or are we okay as it is? I'm just wondering, do we have to make that change, or is it just going to be one of those things that we have to plan for either way?
Well, I don't know what Margaret Hurley's going to say in the letter back to the town on your zoning, because you don't have it yet.
Right.
But I think from the previous discussions we had as a team and also with Adam Costa, I think there's an issue here and we're trying to encourage you to fix it. And I guess, let me just finish what I'm going to say, Bob,
Yeah.
and then I'll turn it over to you.
Go ahead, Judy.
I guess the other thing too is, if you feel like you need to take things in baby steps, maybe you could give us a 2-minute, like, where are you with MBTA community zoning? Because, that might be a suitable, as you say, baby step for offset. If you're actually going to zone areas that can be built for multifamily development, then, you're doing something now as opposed to nothing. If you're just trying to put the zoning where nothing can be built, then, that's a problem. But if you're actually looking at places where something could happen, that's better than what you've got now. Bobby, you were going to say something.
Well, I just responding to Eric, your question or comment. I think as we've alluded to before, there's a couple of issues here. One is legal issue, and the other is procedural issue. And along with what Judy started this conversation, what is it that you want? So you have an open space procedure in your bylaw, and you have a multifamily procedure, presuming that the town wants open space protection development and multifamily development. But by sending it to town meeting, you have put the biggest roadblock to those things happening as you possibly can
Right.
procedurally. Because, you know, a developer could say, well, I can file a standard subdivision plan, go to the planning board, get it approved and start building in,
Right.
you know, quote unquote, no time. Or I can wait, you know, however long it takes to get to town meeting and have to deal with all of that and then go to the special permit with the planning board, which will be 2, 3, 4 times as many. But from the legal perspective, here's where Judy and I are coming from.
Yeah.
And Adam, and most people we've talked to, when we tried to find out if anybody else is doing this, there is no statutory language that allows town meeting to become a land use permit authority in chapter 40A or anyplace else. There's no court case on this point. There's no statutory language that says, well, if town meeting denies this request for open space plan or a multifamily development, here's the appeal procedure. There's no appeal procedure. So what happens if town meeting says no? There is no land use permit procedure in the state or any other state that doesn't have an appeal procedure attached to it.
Right.
Okay, so that raises really big legal questions. The only statutory language related to zoning for town meeting, as you well know, is they get to adopt the bylaw and the map, and they get to adopt amendments to the bylaw. And the map. That is the only statutory language that gives them authority over zoning. So those to us are pretty significant questions. And that's why we think this needs to be fixed. And it's not taking rights away from town meeting, because we don't believe town meeting has any right to do this.
Begin with.
Now, what's going to be interesting is if the Attorney General's letter says anything about this or not.
Right.
And if they don't say anything about this, it is not, you can't leap from no statement to saying, oh, well, they say this is perfectly fine. And we've had, and I'm sure Judy will agree with me in this, and other towns where I've had things go to the Attorney General as part of a recode, knowing that there were things in the bylaw that were in violation of, you know, some court decision or whatever, and the AG sends it back and never makes a mention of those sections because they're focusing on something else.
Right.
So it would be helpful to have that letter just to know where they land, or do they ignore it or whatever. Just that would be one good answer. But ultimately there needs to be a more thorough, I think, investigation, or not investigation, but conversation about really, does this have any legal standing at all to keep this into the bylaw? And if the answer is no, then that's what you have to tell town meeting.
Right.
If the answer is, well, we don't know because there's no court case, maybe, but then you have to talk to town meeting about, well, do you really want these two procedures to go forward? Because making people go to town meeting for approval is a huge roadblock to, you know, having these things happen. And if you look at the objectives in your bylaw on these things, you have really excellent objectives. You know, it's really well written about what you want these two procedures to do for the town. And there's a lot of goodness there. It's just a question of, you know, how the town, you know, really thinks about the two procedures, and are these objectives something they really want or not.
I mean, you can say you want to protect open space all you want, but if you're making somebody go to town meeting to get approval before they can even do an open space residential project, that your zoning doesn't say you want it.
So at this point, do we want Bob and Judy to write us some language just to remove that one piece so that, or do we need to wait for the Attorney General to get back to us on our most recent submission?
Well, Mr. Chair, before you request that, I just wanted to weigh in if you'd like with
Please.
regards to MBTA and how it might impact your perspective on multifamilies section of the bylaw.
Yep.
So while everybody's already iterated the importance of the removal of town meeting approval, as the town moves forward and is forced to make decisions about its MBTA and 3A district, it's the same thing, for multifamily development by right, it's essentially, in my opinion, to a certain extent, in terms of like the diversity of housing in town, almost going to take the place of your multifamily bylaw. So by introducing a 3A district that allows multifamily by right, if that's in addition to your multifamily bylaw itself, the feedback that I've gotten from the community is that it's not necessary, it doesn't have the appetite to continuously create new opportunities for multifamily development, beyond at least the areas that have already been identified. So as the town moves forward with 3A compliant zoning with areas where multifamily can be developed by right, it might reduce the importance of this multifamily bylaw and potentially you might not want to adjust where your R3 districts are, but it might give you the opportunity to say, well, when the 3A zoning district gets established and multifamily with a prescriptive density becomes part of the zoning bylaw, what housing is the community going to be missing? And when I speak to other planners in other adjacent communities like Tyngsborough, and even communities that aren't adjacent MBTA communities, in a lot of cases, Massachusetts communities are missing what is referred to as the middle housing, or the missing middle, where there is affordable single family or maybe duplex, less dense residential housing that is affordable for certain demographics within your community, where sure, an affordable condo might be reasonable, but if the multifamily developments are all rentals and somebody wants to own or doesn't want to own a condo, there's not a lot in between multifamily construction and 1.5 acre zoned 3,000 square foot houses. So these are like starter homes, working class homes, or village style developments that either help entry level, low income, or seniors stay in their community. So I bring this up only because I want the zoning review committee to consider whether or not this provides an opportunity to say, okay, 3A district will be essentially taking over the purpose of our multifamily zoning bylaw. What can we be adjusting either within our R3 district or anywhere else that helps get what's considered multifamily, like a 2-family or larger structure, built in town? And is it something that the community is interested in incorporating into its housing diversity? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and my question, I guess, Eric, would be, if in fact the 3A development should come to fruition, at this point with our bylaws, does that have to get voted on and passed at town meeting?
The way it's written today, technically, yes.
Okay.
So in order for the 3A portion of when the town finally crafts language in the zoning bylaw that corresponds with the district boundaries that we've been discussing, which we're still talking about where this district is going to exist. We haven't started talking about the language that would define what types of development and what regulations might apply that are still compliant with the state's legislation. The town will not be considered compliant if it doesn't already make an amendment to its existing multifamily bylaw. Would you agree with that, Judy?
Absolutely.
Right.
So even though we believe we're compliant, it would go before the town to vote to make sure that we're compliant. Is that?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean there. So the process moving forward between now and what I would anticipate to be annual town meeting in May of next year, next calendar year. The zoning review committee, NIMCOG, is going to be working with the town to craft a new section of your bylaw that corresponds with your 3A compliant district that you've identified, like what components, where would this district exist within the town of Tyngsborough? Well, once you've identified those boundaries of the district, the state isn't saying, great, you define the area, we'll define the zoning. It's giving municipalities the opportunity to define its own zoning, and then they evaluate it for compliance with their legislation. The big rule of thumb there is that the multifamily has to be permissible by right. So in your 3A district, it's not a special permit process.
Right.
It's a site plan review process, but that's sort of like, it increases the importance of the regulations that you might build into your zoning bylaw that addresses the land that is defined by your 3A district.
Okay. So,
And then, of course, I'm sorry to interrupt, but then, of course, like when you present, in order for that to become part of your zoning bylaw, a town meeting must approve it before it becomes part of your zoning bylaw for the Attorney General's office to evaluate. By the time your amendment proposal reaches town meeting, it will have already been reviewed by what is now referred to as the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, formerly known as DHCD, or the Department of Housing and Community Development. They're the state entity that is charged with reviewing the zoning amendments for MBTA communities for compliance with their legislation. We will be sending them preliminary reviews of your zoning language, et cetera, so that you don't have a proposal sent to town meeting that then the state suddenly says, oh, you should have revised it to say this, this, and this. That way, whatever's getting proposed to town meeting will already be accepted and sort of has a stamp of approval from the state before it gets voted on by the town. And we don't have to do it twice or multiple times.
okay. Anybody else want to weigh in on this little?
Yeah, can I, if I may,
Yes,
Mr.
please
Chair?
do.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, it sounds like relative to the multifamily bylaw. And Judy, I know that you had asked the question if our intent is to comply, not just comply, but to actually have a good plan. And I think we do. I think that, you know, I don't think it is our intent to somehow magically shift into huge amounts of, multifamily and high density housing in there. But I do think that we want to not only comply, but we also want to be able to, and I'm sorry if you're getting feedback, but I also think that we want to provide housing that is, that's good for, affordable housing. We understand that there are people that work in town and work close by and they can't afford to live here. And we don't want to have that. So, I think that we clearly want to comply, and I do think we will definitely have a bylaw in the spring for our annual town meeting, which is the MBTA communities piece. And it sounds like it might be, because we already got to change our multifamily at that point anyway, to remove the town meeting approval on that one. It might be that we say, you know what, let's tackle both of those, removing the town meeting and special permit, because it needs to be by right, at least in those districts. And we could tackle what it is in other districts, maybe at that same time. But it could be that relative to the open space one, that we say, you know what, we didn't have that one on our radar, and it is our intent to protect open space. And maybe we're going a little bit too far with some of those things, that maybe we look for the fall town meeting. We could sit there and say, could we just pull out that one piece that says town meeting needs to approve that, and we could have it through special permit, which I think is probably the way it is in most of the other ones. And it's really not that much of a change for residents. But I do think we definitely want, it is our intent for MBTAs, the MBTA communities piece, to address multifamily at that point in time as well.
I'm going to ask a question that I should know the answer to, but I don't remember. How many developments have been proposed under the open space residential development bylaw?
I don't have an exact number, none in the 5 years that I've been here. I think that there's been, I can think of at least two that have, I only know of them because they've been problematic with regards to the deed restrictions and the agreements for maintaining the open space. I can think of at least two, so there's that. So I'd say there's probably two to somewhere between 2 and 4. The community also has what I would consider to be a relatively significant number of multifamily residential construction. The state just released its updated subsidized housing inventory lists, and Tyngsborough is at 10.3%, I believe, with the new census numbers, which I wanted to comment on Mr. Poland's remark with regards to defining 40Bs, because from this point forward, as long as Tyngsborough's subsidized housing inventory is over 10%, it is not subject to applications for 40B developments, but the community could determine either through its affordable housing trust or other initiatives or public input to go forth and find opportunities to create affordable housing, which we're doing. So I'm trying to get land from MassDOT to create some affordable housing through the Affordable Housing Trust. We have a project going in just south of the Toll Brothers project that'll incorporate affordable housing. So these are all things that require cooperation between the municipality and the state to ensure that those affordable units get counted, but they're not following the legislative or statutory procedure for 40B because it doesn't have to. So that it actually takes out some of the complications, which is helpful.
This brings up another point that I had about the 40B and the MBTA community. We're waiting to find out from NCOG if we're going to have authorization to include our inclusionary zoning bylaw on the MBTA community developments. We haven't gotten that back yet. In lieu of that, I would hope that we would have some sort of a waiver for the total number of units in the MBTA community that would not offset our current 10.3% affordable index.
Not going to happen.
Well, that's a problem. That's a problem.
Let me interject, because I think I can address Mr. Poland's concerns in a positive way. So the state's perspective on those is that there's high confidence, if not almost certainty, that the town will be able to demonstrate reasoning behind having a 12% requirement on their 3A district, which is what the current inclusionary bylaw requires. And and that would basically negate the need for a waiver or anything else with regards to offsetting your SHI. If you have multifamily development as a result of your new 3A district, if 12% of them need to be affordable, it's only going to increase your percentage on your SHI. And then I think you had a question, I thought you might have been headed towards a question about whether the community can include any of its 40B developments in its 3A district. And the answers that we've received from NIMCOG, which is from the state, is that yes, we'll be able to include non-rental 40B developments in our district. So we found a 25-acre parcel that includes almost all of that, but we excluded the rental components, which is not a problem.
So there is an update on that.
Thanks, Judy. Go ahead.
They are not going to issue a formal statement about the inclusion of 40Bs in MBTA communities districts.
Okay.
They're not going to issue it. This was just announced at a meeting on Friday morning.
Which is in my, so far, I mean, from an optimistic perspective, that's fine with me. They kind of tipped their hand a little bit with regards to what their apprehension was, which had to do with market rate rental units that are included on your SHI, because a certain percentage of that development was made affordable. So for those of us that are watching, for the record, if a community created a rental development, if 25% of the units were affordable, the state was allowing 100% of the development, 100% of those units to go on your SHI. So communities have market rate units on its subsidized housing inventory in order to encourage rental developments in communities. And that was what they were concerned about, saying, sure, we'll let you include those in your 3A district. On the other hand, for ownership affordable units, they never offered the opportunity for market rate units to be included on your SHI. So we're not anticipating any, at least I'm not anticipating any pushback or apprehension from the state to include ownership related 40B developments in an MBTA district. Unless, Judy, you've heard them change their tune with regards to saying, I don't care what type of development or units they are in a 40B development, we might reject your 3A district if it includes anything related to a 40B development. That wasn't the feedback I was receiving up till today.
They are not going to issue a formal statement on the inclusion of 40Bs.
Okay, which is
Um,
fine. As we
yeah.
move forward, even before the community has drafted language in its zoning bylaw, the town can present its proposed zoning districts to the state and get their feedback on it.
Right.
Which is fine. That way you're not wasting time moving all the way towards the spring town meeting of next year with a misunderstanding of what the state's perspective is on your proposed district boundaries.
I don't know what the schedule is for towns submitting, but presumably it's gonna be like rolling out. Towns will be submitting, some towns will submit early, some towns a little later, and
That's right.
as the state gears up in its review process, the expectation is you'll start getting messages back from the state as to what's acceptable and what's not acceptable.
And the priority right now is going to be the rapid transit communities because they have to have the zoning in place before everybody else.
And we're considered one of those communities.
Not rapid transit, no.
Okay.
If you had a T station, you would.
So just so I kind of understand this a little better, if it would be to our advantage to submit early under the guidelines that we have right now, because if I'm hearing you correct, Judy, they haven't ruled yet, but they may change those guidelines going forward.
There may be any number of changes in the guidelines between now and the time the districts start being approved. We're expecting a change in the guidelines any day now.
Okay, so it's that, it'll happen that soon.
Well,
As if we
but
could
not
get
on,
it-
but I mean, they're going to continue to make changes is what you need to know. So there's a particular topic that they're going to address in some type of update. I don't know if it's going to be a memo or an insertion in the guidelines, but it's coming. And then there may be more because there are other topics they haven't addressed yet that have come up for some of the communities, such as what do we do when we have a groundwater protection district that requires a special permit for any increase in density or more than 15% coverage. That has not been addressed yet, but that's supposedly coming.
So if in fact they do start, if we were to get approved early, whatever that means, is that it for us? If they change the guidelines and then we have to go back and resubmit it to be current with the new guidelines?
I can't answer that question.
Okay. All right.
In
I
order
was a
for it
really
to be
good bureaucrat. I was really good at it.
in order for it to be approved, Chaz, it needs to have been presented to town meeting. It needs to be passed. It needs to get through technically through the Attorney General's office. It has to be a passed zoning amendment in order for it to be considered compliant. So the soonest that would even happen is the current plan, which is spring town meeting or the annual town meeting in May. So it's not like we need to hurry up or expedite the process in order to get under the wire for something. And that's typically not the way the state's been operating either, saying, hurry up and you'll get these benefits. It's more like, play along with these rules to the game. Yes, we might change the goalposts, deal with it. It's been frustrating, but generally speaking, I don't see a lot of complications with regards to Tyngsborough's current land use and land restrictions, particularly since we've taken a lot of that into consideration in the proposed district boundaries that NIMCOG's been working on.
So you're not going to go for a pre-approval submission?
I think, isn't the pre-approval submission, I mean, it would, in order for them to sort of pre-approve, it would either be, it's technically not official, right? Because it still needs to
Right.
be adopted by the town. We will
There-
be presenting for pre-approval in that, we want them to review what town meeting would be voting on.
That's my
Absolutely.
question. That's my
Yes,
question.
We
Okay.
certainly will be.
All right, should we talk some more about this, or should we maybe switch over to the MBTA district boundaries so that Bob and Judy and the rest of us all have a better idea of where that's gonna kind of land?
Can I just ask a question about the open space bylaw before we move on?
Sure.
Do you want open space residential developments that actually function in design as kind of a cluster that saves a lot of open space? Is that what you want? Because that's not what your zoning says now. Your zoning says now that the minimum lot size is 35,000 square feet for a unit. That is so not cluster zoning. I don't even know where to begin. So it's more than just like, do we just take the town meeting piece away? It's like, do you actually want to encourage open space residential development as the preferred approach to single family development in your town?
Mr. Chair, I can give my opinion.
Sure, please do.
So my opinion is that we don't know. I don't think, it's been kind of a hot button. I think that our version of cluster development has been, rather than doing 2 acres, we would have 1 acre lots and then have an acre of open space around those. That was our version of doing that. I happen to live in one of those from almost 30 years ago. But it has evolved. And that's why I don't have a good feel for what our appetite would be for some of those things. I know that there's a lot of folks that are concerned about overgrowth and fast growth. So, I think that the town would have a better appetite for certain things if we didn't have to worry about things exploding. And I think that's where the big fear is.
But the overall density is based on the actual capacity of the site. It's not that you, because you're shrinking the lot area to 35,000 square feet, that you're getting more homes. You're still tied to what's the as of right density on the site. I'm talking
Right,
about design principle.
Can you briefly give an explanation that addresses that concern, Judy, about
Sure.
open space
So,
residential?
If I have a site that could support 10 units as of right, 10 homes.
An acre and a half zoning.
You want tiny homes?
No,
No,
let him-
I
let him-
said single family homes.
Yes, tiny homes.
Oh,
That's all the
What?
rage.
That's not what I'm talking
no,
about.
that's not what's getting built.
That's not what I'm talking about.
I'm trying to polarize it a little bit.
Well, know,
A couple
fine.
of tiny homes, Joe, just 2 tiny homes.
Just two.
So,
Make them affordable.
okay. If you have a site that as of right could be developed in a standard subdivision for 10 homes.
Right.
The principle of open space residential design is that you don't get more than 10 homes, but you get them clustered on a portion of the site or arranged in some manner that's tighter, so that you can actually save some real open space. That's the concept. If you have a lot area that's as big as 35,000 square feet, to you guys, that may be really small, but I got to tell you, it comes at the expense of saving open space. It actually fragments more of the site than if you allow the developer to save a lot of land and allow the homes to be on lots as small as they could be, given that you've got, wastewater issues and so forth to deal with. I'm just trying to understand qualitatively, what do you want? Because if you really want open space residential design, your zoning says absolutely the opposite.
Well, we currently already have zoning like that. We have 7,000, 5,000 square foot lots. We have a very varied mix in the town. You're thinking that everybody's on a 1 acre, 1.5 acre, 5 acre
No,
lot.
I'm
That's
not.
not the case.
No, I'm not. I'm
So,
sorry.
so we do have a very mix. Now, going forward, I believe we have to gauge what the appetite of that particular zoning requirement would be for the rest of the town. I think they should have some sort of a say in that.
Well, sure, it's going to have to go
I
to
think a
town meeting.
bridge, A bridge to that is the MBTA Communities Act. And that gets us on that page. It gets us good with the state. We're following regulations. We're going to have very good design guidelines that we go through the process. It's going to be a permitted effect on those parcels once they're decided. And then, like I said, and at some future point in time, we could probably address that. I don't know if that's a good time to do that right now.
Sure. Let me interject for just a second, Judy and Mr.
Sure.
Chair. Okay. So the 3A district and open space residential development are very, very different. Because
totally
the
different.
3A district has a prescriptive density with a certain number of homes that can be constructed there and have no regulations with regards to what open space might need to be maintained there. An open space residential development bylaw has a completely different purpose, as Judy was trying to explain, that takes your standard zoning, which in Tyngsborough for the R1 district is 1.5 acres per unit. So as Judy was trying to explain, if you had a parcel of land that could support 10 homes on 1.5 acres each, an open space residential development bylaw would enable a developer to say, okay, well, instead of going through the subdivision process, I'll go through a special permit process to propose a development that theoretically, if this is what the community wants, provides a benefit to the people who live there as well as the rest of the community by concentrating and making creating a single open space piece of land that's accessible to the public and the people who live there in exchange for putting those homes on smaller lots. But as Judy was pointing out, it still ends up at 10. Some communities, in order to encourage this type of land use, because they want more open space available, whether it's 1 acre or 10 acres for walking trails or other types of usage, or for aesthetic reasons, they'll say, we'll give you a whatever, 5%, 10%, 15% density bonus. So you can squeeze in a couple of extra homes because the community says we are prioritizing that type of development over standard 1.5 acre subdivision development. So when Judy's trying to figure out like what the zoning review committee might think that your community is looking for, that she's trying to like pull out priorities, she's trying to determine when it comes to open space residential development or open space preservation, as it relates to housing development, is the town's priority aesthetic? Is it trying to combine land near like existing forests or other types of open spaces that are already protected, where the town says, you know, we have a lot of open space protected land, but we really need more like this. Our parcels that are open space protected are just not big enough for us to feel comfortable with or using or walking. You know, I go for a walk there and I'm done in 20 minutes. I want to walk for an hour. Okay, great. That's your priority. Other communities might say, well, we have a lot of open space, but we want we want to make sure that when housing gets developed in our community moving forward, they're not just using up the open space, they're going to help preserve it, as I mentioned before, to create larger parcels that everybody can access. And she's just trying to figure out what you guys might.
It sounds great. It sounds great on paper, but like Selectman Eric Eldridge was just talking about, the communities that have the horseshoe ring around them, it's usually like a buffer of 100 feet. When the developer goes in, he's going to actually put his houses maybe in a cluster zone that are beneficial to him. So he's going to be on a slight elevation. He's going to be away from the wetlands. Everything that gets turned back into that open space is going to be the less desirable land. You're not going to be taking a walk in the marsh. Okay, so you have to look at it in reality. On paper, it sounds great, and that's what we're being fed here. But that's not what happens generally in any of these cases. Okay, what we should be doing is protecting our current open space and protecting our open farmland that's currently in use, in active use. Those are the prime parcels that we have to maintain. We are a farming community, and that's what we should be doing.
Right. I think the town is doing a good job of that, by the way. Yep.
Larry?
So I actually do have one question on this, just to make sure that I just want to make sure I actually understand this. So we have easy numbers. We have 10 acres, we have 10 houses. You know, option number one would be, we're going to say zoning is 1 acre per house. Everyone gets an acre, house goes on each acre. That acre is owned by the people that own the home. They pay taxes on it, they maintain it. That's option number one. Another option would be to say, all right, we're going to take the 10 houses and we're going to put them all together on 1 acre, and we're going to have 9 acres of open space. So I guess my question would be, who owns that 9 acres of open space? What controls are there to make sure that that doesn't get developed at a later time if somebody decides that we need more housing? How does that work?
Well, the open space, by your bylaw, which is a pretty standard bylaw, there has to be a homeowners association created. The land is put in, is then owned by the homeowners association. There is a conservation restriction put on the land in accordance with state statutes that protect that land from any development permanently. And then there is language in your bylaw that the planning board, through the special permit process, reviews documents as to how the homeowners association, what the responsibilities are of the homeowners association to maintain that land, including things like having a yearly assessment into a pot of money, or other regulations that the homeowners association has to abide by to protect that open space. So it is
Right.
permanently protected.
So taxes and insurance are going to be have to be covered by the HOA.
Right.
Yeah.
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 And if
Eric,
I could, no, I'm sorry.
Eric, so I know, haven't we run into problems with that type of situation in town where a homeowners association does not end up paying taxes, and then someone comes along and scoops up that property and uses it for something else?
You can't do it. It's got a
It's
permanent
restriction.
conservation restriction on it. It's it's
Right.
registry of deeds, it's the state's signatory on it. So that cannot happen.
Well, we had a parcel that was not adopted by an HOA, and that's exactly what happened in Tyngsborough.
Okay, then that's the one I'm thinking about, Joe.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, you do have to.
I don't think that's a
Or all the
reason to
I's are
not
dotted
adopt
and
open
T's
space
crossed.
residential if, basically the town didn't have adequate staffing to
Right.
ensure that the conservation restriction was filed properly, but,
Right.
yep. But that's
Can I-
something that the town's working through, so it really hasn't led to, it hasn't led to unexpected or unintended development in that regard. But it did lead to some complications in order to get the conservation protections that should have been in place to begin with completed.
Can I ask a clarification here? Because Judy, I might not have described it correctly. So one of these developments, so I live on a development that was built 28 years ago. There are 63 homes. The homes have approximately 1 acre. I have just under an acre. And then there is land that is part of an HOA that is around, and that's open space and it's deed restricted. And in fact, I think now the town is looking at leveraging the land trust
Mhm,
to take over that space so that these types of things don't happen.
mhm.
How is that different than what we're proposing? Or is that basically the same thing? Just saying, look, it's not going to go in front of town meeting. Those would be special permit to do those types of things. And then we could put certain restrictions on it saying, look, we don't, in Larry's example, we don't want to have 10 homes on 1 acre. We might want to sit there and say, look, the density needs to be, X, but the open space needs to be maintained in such a way, and whether that's through land trust or an HOA with conservation restrictions, whatever it is.
Mhm.
But it just wouldn't go through town meeting, which is kind
Right.
of the odd thing. Is that how am I understanding that correctly? That all we're saying
Yeah.
is, look, you should have something that's in there because, open space and some of these things is a good way to develop, because I know I don't want to take care of an acre and a half. I mow my lawn still, and it's a pain in the butt and 1 acre is plenty. But I also wouldn't want to have, you know, half-acre lots with, you know, postage stamp types of things that you might see in other areas. So is that what we're talking about, is codifying that a little bit better and just removing the town meeting component to it?
So that's what I was trying to find out what you want, because if all you want to do is resolve what could be a potential legal problem, then just change it, just get the town meeting out of it. My question was a qualitative one.
Mhm.
What are you trying to really save open space? Because if that's what you're trying to do, that's not what your bylaw says. That's all I'm trying to say. There are other changes that would make it a better bylaw from an open space perspective. But if you don't want to go there, that's entirely a policy choice for you guys.
Yeah, and my take on that is similar to what Joe was saying. So I think we do want to do that, whether that's front and center for some of the other challenges that might be a bigger risk to the town, you know, in dealing with our farms and some of the large scale open spaces that we have that could potentially change use. I would agree with that. I do think we want to do it. I don't think it's a particularly troublesome area anymore for us, but I like to remove legal barriers if they're simple and we can remove them. Then I generally like to go down that road.
Bob?
Just a reminder, your bylaw does require a planning board special permit for the open
Right.
space plan. So if you
Right.
remove town meeting, you've already got the special permit process in
Yep.
place.
Right.
And to Eric's point, I think we want to remove anything that could be legally troublesome. And that seems like a pretty easy fix.
Yep.
So Larry, you're shaking your head. Go ahead. Larry, did you have a comment?
I did not,
Oh, okay. All right.
sorry.
I think that if we can just kind of focus the Springtown meeting on getting ourselves as legal as possible with these two items, that we can review them beyond that and then decide what we want to do. I don't want to throw too much at town meeting to have a whole bunch of different changes that all of a sudden could sink the ship legally. So those would be my recommendations. I don't know. Does that sound about right to the rest of the board?
To me, it does. Can I ask one question, maybe for a word of advice from Judy and Bob? So there's a bunch of questions that you've asked about, okay, what do you want to do, right? What are your goals? And sometimes we've had a good answer and sometimes it hasn't been as firm as, you know, as clear as we would like. You know, one of the things that we've been talking about is revisiting some of our housing plan. You know, we did one for 2020 to 2024.
Right.
It's on our list to look at what we want to do, because there's been a lot of changes, frankly, in the last 5 years as far as what's been going on in the area and the world. And I think it's time for us to review that. It seems to me that we should come up with what our strategic vision is for our housing and what types of growth we're willing to, you know, we feel is going to best maintain the character of the town and address some of these issues. Should we be setting up like kind of a strategic group to look at those things so that we can better answer your questions, so that you can better help us say, well, based on what you're telling me, you should do this, this, and this?
Yeah. I do.
Okay.
Please don't make another committee. Can the zoning?
No,
Yeah.
I'm just looking at it by saying I feel bad that we can't come up with clear answers on some of those things that have been vetted, you know, across a broader audience, to sit there and say, hey, I feel with very good certainty that this is the direction that we want to go. And I've been a consultant before, and I know that it's very hard to consult with somebody if they don't know where they want to go. And that, you're trying to help us come up with the answer. We're asking you to give us an answer when really it should be, we should be defining what we want. And then you can say, well, based on what you want, you might want to consider this. And then we really come up with the answer.
That's kind of what I was trying to do.
Sure. What would be helpful for me as a planner, Judy, and for the committee, I think, is it doesn't have to be like off the cuff, but if you had a certain set of questions that you think the community could answer, the answers don't have to come from the committee members. The committee and myself, we can facilitate, community input sessions or surveys or other things so that people can weigh in on, those questions. So you get a better sense of what the community's opinions are about where they'd like to go. But I'm just not 100% sure. I'd like some help with you to come up with those questions so that we can move forward with advising.
Bob?
Well, Judy and I will have to talk about this, but one of the things that I have used successfully in Falmouth over the years, because these conversations go on with all of them. And I think we may have done this in Andover, I'm not sure, because I put together what I call discussion paper. And say, okay, this is the section of the bylaw that, has been kind of talked around and around. These are the questions that have come up. These are the questions we, the consultants, have for the town. Here's some issues.
Yep.
This is problematic. This may be illegal. This language is a problem. And here's some questions that the town, whoever the town is, should think about, but it helps to start frameworking the issue.
Yep.
And put boundaries on the issue so that you can get a focus. And whether it's this committee or other people can, not be all over the place, but focus on this particular part of the bylaw, on this issue, on these questions. And that generally helps move things forward and gets people coming up with some really good ideas.
Okay. At this point, does it make sense? We've only got Judy for another 25 minutes to move on to the MBTA boundaries that NEMCOG has sort of helped us with, so that we can get some input from her.
Mr. Chair, can we actually have Judy give us a proposal for making the open space multifamily housing more legal, so that we can review it maybe next time or get a copy of it?
Absolutely, yep. That and the multifamily as well, for removing the legal piece for our town meeting. So, yeah, if we could have both those, that'd be great. I think that's what we're really looking to do, is to get things rolling. So,
Okay.
Eric, the MBTA.
Sure. Let me just pull up the minutes I've got here, and then I can share. All right, so I'll apologize now for stumbling through this. This was received yesterday. I've had a lot of meetings between receiving it and tonight's meeting, so I'll be going through the slides. I don't have the details on all of the minor pieces of information, but I will say that I did spend a lot of time with Mike Asciola and Kelly over at NIMCOG to process and come up with responses to the strategies that the Zoning Review Committee had suggested during the last meeting. And for sort of a review, the last time the Zoning Review Committee met and we're discussing some of the 3A district boundaries that were proposed in the scenarios for NIMCOG, NIMCOG was presenting essentially 5 different individual areas around town and evaluating whether any one of those individual areas could potentially be in consideration for the entire district. And the Zoning Review Committee said, well, it seems like the legislation allows us to break up our district into multiple areas, and that's correct, in that the legislation allows communities to have multiple contiguous areas around town, where one of them has to be at least 25 acres for an adjacent community like Tyngsborough. So we asked NIMCOG to go identify 25-acre components. The committee was suggesting or requesting that to come up with combinations of district boundaries that minimize near-term immediate development of housing that might be able to break up potential projects. So if they were in multiple parts of town, that would, I don't want to say be a barrier, but would make it less likely that simultaneous proposals would be happening at the same time. And if there was already land uses there, it might also help spread things out with regards to a timeline. So in response to that, they've addressed, multiple areas within town. As you might recall, there was one area along Kendall Road that was almost unanimously turned down, saying we didn't want to consider that. But the two areas in town that the committee and NIMCOG have been focused on are in the upper retail commercial corridor of town in the northern part of Middlesex Road, as well as the intersection that's commonly referred to as Flint's Corner at the intersection of Westford and Dunstable Roads. So in some of these scenarios, we have essentially we're suggesting to split up the district into three separate components: a 25-acre district, a 15-acre district, and a 10-acre district. So under scenario A, we have portions of town like this large 25-acre area where the 40B development has already taken place. That takes up 50% of your district area. And then it leaves the town to determine whether or how to structure its other two areas. So I'm just trying to understand how he's split up the district areas for scenario A. So we have, as I mentioned, sub-district 1, this is along the 40B, it's 27.5 acres. It would be developable density of 15, but there's already housing there, so it's unlikely to be redeveloped in the next several decades. And the unit capacity itself is 411. That's important because the state is looking for a unit capacity of 750 in the 3A district. This is a closer view of the district boundary that would be there. In scenario A, the sub-district 2 would be the parking area of the Pheasant Lane Mall. So this is a 12.3 acre area that is currently undeveloped. But if it were to be developed, I've been suggesting that it would have a positive impact on the economic development and the economic health of Tyngsborough's retail and commercial corridor, where it's essentially the most important up in the northern portion of Middlesex Road. The unit capacity here would be 184. And then there'd be a third portion under scenario A, which would be a sort of like a cutoff of the industrial portions of the land that is behind what is currently the Olive Garden. This is the site where there is an existing special permit that's been issued for industrial development, a large 500,000 square foot building. There's no guarantees that that building will get constructed. There's no guarantees that rezone, including this district there, might entice a developer to reevaluate their use of that land. But obviously, if the warehouse building that is currently permitted gets constructed there, it's unlikely that it'll become housing. Anecdotally, I will mention that, with the zoning review committee's review of these various scenarios, it gives me the opportunity to talk to potential landowners and what their perspectives would be on land use if any of these scenarios were approved at town meeting. And this is the third portion of the district. I forgot to mention what the size of that area was. A 10.4 acre area inside the industrial portion. I like it because it maintains the retail components of those parcels. So if it did end up getting used for residential multifamily development, it wouldn't take up the town's commercial space. It would only be on the industrial land behind it, which I think is pretty helpful. This is a lot of data, but this unit capacity per district table is what the state would be reviewing to help evaluate compliance with their legislation. So you plugged it into a spreadsheet tool that the state's provided to regional planning agencies and consultants that are helping communities define its districts. All right, so next would be a different combination. This would be scenario B. It combines, again, the 27.5 acre area that is your 40B development. I believe all of our scenarios are going to incorporate that based on the priorities that the zoning review committee expressed. But it would be combined with a larger area behind the Olive Garden in the industrial district. It would be expanded from 10.3 to 22.7 acres, making up a larger portion of your overall district, which means that the third area, which I'll be getting to next, is going to be smaller. So this is the area within where that large industrial building would be developed or is permitted to be developed. And then sorry, so there's not 3 areas there. The scenario B just makes up the district out of two areas. You've got your 40B district, and the remainder of your required acreage would be on the industrial portions of 424 and 406 Middlesex Road behind Olive Garden. This is a brief summary of scenario C. This combines your 40B district with areas and acreage near Flint's Corner. Again, I've already described the acreage where you've got 40B housing already constructed. In this particular case, the sub-district 2 would be at the intersection of Westford and Dunstable Road at Flint's Corner. The yellow lines are identifying the proposed district boundaries, and the red areas are red because that's currently where our B3 district is defined in our zoning table or our zoning map. So you'd have a 22.8 acre area there. The reason why some of those spaces, as a reminder, why some of those spaces along Dunstable Road are excluded from the district have to do with wellhead environmental protections. So that's sort of trying to preempt some of the objections at the state level that Judy might have mentioned earlier in the meeting with regards to environmental restrictions that would prevent development from taking place there whatsoever. And here's a slightly bigger detail with regards to that district area. So that would include Flint's Corner, some other parcels off of Westford Road with some frontage along Dunstable, extending down to Tyngsborough. And that brings me to the end of the report. So that wasn't too bad to explain. I'm hoping that the zoning review committee, I'd be happy to pull up any other combinations of this presentation for reference, but we're looking for general sentiment from zoning review committee members about what you think about the proposed combinations and whether NIMCOG has adequately addressed the concerns that were expressed at the last meeting. And as we move forward with some of these proposals, if the zoning review committee likes these 3 scenarios, we can continue to reach out to the community to get more public feedback as we move forward with addressing the zoning components, like the definitions of the zoning amendment to support the district.
Eric, I only had one question on scenario A, and that was the parcel, or scenario B, that was the parcel behind Olive Garden. Since that's a seemingly landlocked development, are there any accommodations to have access to Middlesex Road? Would that be privately through some lot that we have access to, or how would that work out?
That's a good question. The legislation does not require that the district have certain types of frontage. So although these parcels do have frontage on Middlesex Road, in order, if this proposal was passed at town meeting and the landowners decided that they wanted to explore and or move forward with by right multifamily development in this district, they would have to provide access to these either through existing parcels in the back, through agreements, or through access roads from Middlesex Road. So they would be responsible for constructing public and or private ways. So they either have to create a public way that conforms to the engineering standards established by Tyngsborough or establish a private way.
Thank you.
Judy, do you see any? Well, I guess there's no problem yet, but all three of these scenarios are kind of hinged on the 40B developments. Do you see that being an issue going forward at some point, or do you think it's all right to combine those, or to have those in this combination?
So I have been concerned about it. We were hoping that HLC, as we shorthand call it, would be producing some guidance on this, because it's been brought up many times in so-called, we have office hours meetings with the staff there every other week, and it's come up a lot because we're not the only consultants with communities that have that concern. And what we were told on Friday is that they're not going to issue any opinion on this at all. So, I think if this is where you want to put those districts, I think you should go ahead and do it. And go through the pre-adoption review, and actually they said specifically, we'll address it during pre-adoption review. So rather than getting sort of an official statement that everybody can rely on, it's going to be handled, I think, case by case. So if this is what you want to do, I think you should go ahead and do it. And I wouldn't lose a lot of sleep over it.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question for Judy.
Yep, go ahead, please.
Since municipalities haven't been privileged to be part of the conversations with the states, they've been interacting directly with the consultants and RPAs that are
Right.
assisting the municipalities. It's not, I'm not saying that to complain. This is why I'm asking Judy this question, because I don't know the specific answer. Do you anticipate that the state would have a problem with evaluating more than one proposal? In other words, for pre-approval, if all three of these scenarios were submitted to the state for their opinion, and all three of them included the 40B parcel, can we get feedback so that when we move forward with public outreach, we're not going forward with public outreach on a scenario that the state's going to deny or have a problem with to begin with?
Given the number of communities that are going to be looking for pre-adoption,
And it's one of the reasons I was
Review.
asking.
I don't think that they're going to respond well to that. I think they'll ask you to decide what is your priority,
Okay.
and they'll review that.
Well, the good news, zoning review committee, is that all three of your scenarios do include this, and that's your biggest question. So even if you only submitted one, hopefully you'd get that answer.
So are we gonna try and select a scenario tonight, Eric? Is that what we want to do?
I don't think it makes sense I don't think it's fair to the remaining zoning review committee members that might not be present, for everybody that's here tonight to say, this is the way we're gonna move forward. I did send out this report to the whole zoning review committee. I think it makes sense to come up with a reasonable amount of time to say, hey, can we please have every member of the zoning review committee prioritize the combinations for scenario A, B, and C. I think the community would benefit from incorporating or including these scenarios in discussions with the public moving forward as well. So while I certainly appreciate having a very functional zoning review committee that's made up of highly engaged and reasonable members of various boards, I don't want your community to turn back and say, well, it's great that we had all these, participants from elected boards and others participating in this process, but when did you come out and ask us what we thought? So I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to present more than one scenario to the public at some point as well.
Sure, I agree with that. Do we want to discuss the pros and cons of these three as far as the?
That would definitely help me, and I'm sure it would probably help Judy with regards to people's thoughts on what you think of the three of them.
Well, let's start with Mr. Eldridge.
Okay, well, I think NEMCOG did a good job of listening to what we were talking about, and some of the concerns. I think that the first scenario, I think where there's three separate ones, I think that kind of breaks some of the items up. I think that there's some benefits by the Pheasant Lane Mall There are some benefits behind Olive Garden in that they were particularly large places, large parcels that we could work with, but we didn't take all in one place. I think that scenario 2 removes the Pheasant Lane Mall from the mix and, makes it a little bit bigger in that area behind Olive Garden. The thing I didn't like about the third scenario was around Westford Road. That parcel at Flint's Corner, while we already have some mixed use there that we wanted to put in, that parcel that's kind of broken up with all the different areas, and working around some of the wells and some of the things that were there, I just didn't know whether that would be looked at as being advantageous for a developer or for some of those areas. The only other thing that I looked at there is, and again, I didn't have days to review this, but I noticed that the density for this one was at like 17.4 in order to get us to the 750 units. So I was a little bit concerned about that. So I think between the makeup of the parcel and the density, that one looked to be less advantageous than the other two. But I appreciate that NEMCOG listened to what we were talking about. I think they gave us 3 viable options for us to discuss and get feedback on. So those are my initial thoughts.
Joe?
I like these proposals. I really can't see too much wrong with any of them. Being that we have a baseline that we're going to have Merrimack Landing or that area as being a component, we're left again with Flint across the street from, in back of Olive Garden and the mall. The only problem I have is with the parcel behind Olive Garden and the fact that it's currently zoned and somebody has a permit on that. If a partial parcel of that is scheduled for housing, I don't know how willing people will be to having industrial warehouses right behind their homes, closer to Route 3. And it to me, it would be either the whole area would be zoned for that or not much at all, because it is in a little tougher spot because of access. But what I like about it is that it's up near the commercial district. It's right across from the parking lot at the mall. So the 2 parcels I like, and my thought process behind this is to redevelop parcels. And I think I said this before, that would benefit in redevelopment. So meaning you're taking something that's of lesser desirable quality and not so much tearing down forested woodlands, but taking existing parcels that you'd want to improve upon. So that would be the southerly parking lot of the mall, in conjunction with either this parcel or the other larger one that I'm seeing in blue here. I do like the Flint's Corner, but away from the plaza. The plaza serves a very good purpose for that area. Across the street from the Flint's Corner Plaza, we do have some land that could be redeveloped and probably be a betterment to that. So that's my idea. The problem with this is the access to behind Dollar Tree, behind Olive Garden. And if we divvy it up too much, it's not going to be a good fit for the current owner, probably, because he's going to have half housing and half industrial. That's the only problem I saw with that one.
Larry?
I appreciate the fact that we were listened to, and we were definitely listened to. These are 3 good options. I kind of like scenario, not kind of, I absolutely like scenario B the best of them all. And then, A would be second to that, and C would be my last choice of these 3. But you know, these are three good options.
All right, so I like spreading it out as much as possible, therefore scenario A would sort of come to the top for me. I guess my concern, Eric, would be how much longer is the permit good for the warehouse behind Olive Garden? I mean, that
Sure.
coming up
Special
on a
permits.
year, I think.
Yeah, special permits are good for 2 years. Of course, it's up to the discretion of the planning board for extensions. So, I mean, it could be indefinite with regards to what the town and or the planning board decides is the right priority for the community. So when a developer or the developer that has that special permit in hand comes and says, I need another 2 years for these financial reasons, the capital market's changed. You know, I can't answer for the planning board, but it would be up to their discretion to say, yep, we understand, and this is an important tax revenue stream for us in the future decades, and we'll give you as much time as you need. Or they turn around and say, you know what? A lot of things have changed in the last 2 years, and the capital markets are going to change anytime soon. So we're only going to extend it this amount of time. And if you can't get it done, you know, we'll see what's going to come next. It's so hard to say. So giving you an exact answer to that, I don't have one. It's really
Okay, and
discretionary.
fair enough. Judy, this question is for you, and I know you got to get out of here. If in fact we were to accept any one of these that has the warehouse property involved in it, and that warehouse development should begin during the approval process from the state, what happens at that point? Do you have any idea?
What the state cares about is what does the zoning allow?
So they
So
don't,
if the developer decides to do something else that's permitted, that's the developer's call. What matters is what does your zoning say that developer could do on that site?
It's almost non-intuitive considering that the apprehension that the state's expressed with regards to 40B developments, because it makes people think that they care about what's on the ground. And what the state's saying is, we only care about that one thing that's on the ground, and then maybe some others. But Judy's correct in that whether the construction for that warehouse is started or not, according to the current guidelines and legislation that's been provided by the state, you know, that acreage is compliant.
And I would just say, I actually thank you for saying it that way, Eric, because what I've asked my staff to do and I try to do is always answer the question based on current guidelines,
Yeah, it's like, look, what else can we do? Right?
based on
Yeah.
current guidelines.
okay, fair enough.
I gotta go. Is that all right? I mean, Eric, I can follow up with you tomorrow if you want.
I really appreciate your input tonight. Thanks for coming, Judy.
Yes,
No
Judy, thank
problem.
you
Bob,
very
I'll talk
much.
to you later. Yeah, take care, guys. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
So as we're looking at these, we really defined 4 different areas. Flint's Corner, the parking lot, behind Olive Garden, and the 40B. All of which I think we, at least some of us, like those. Could we be looking at maybe coming up with 4 locations rather than 2 or 3? Is that something NEMCOG would be? Or is that something we would like to ask NEMCOG to look at?
I can ask them about that. I don't know if there's a minimum size area that the states, I have to go back and look at the guidelines to see if they said, look, we've already told you that you have to have one portion of your district has to be at least 25 acres, which we're doing.
Yeah.
But I can't recall if they've said, you know, if you're proposing a portion of your district to be 8 acres, that's too small. So it can't be any less than 10. I can't recall if that was one of the guidelines. So I
Right.
didn't anticipate a portion becoming that tiny. And I think that's where you'd be headed. Once you break it up into 4 pieces, you've got 25 divided by 4. So, you know, it's getting pretty
By
small.
3. We would keep the
Yeah,
one.
by 3. That's right. Right.
We
25.
would keep the one, and then you're at 8+ acres. So, okay, well, those are my thoughts. Anybody else have anything they want to add to it?
Can I, Mr. Chair,
Sure, yes,
I,
go ahead.
one of the things that I could use, can you please poll the committee or the folks that are present with regards to their opinions about whether or not, like, how does the zoning review committee prioritize the potential economic impact? Not negative. I guess I'm trying to stick with the positive. I look at the potential in the Pheasant Lane Mall parking areas. Although there might be school and or public services impacts, I believe that the overall financial impact to the town from a tax revenue and future growth perspective, it provides a good opportunity for the community to say, hey, we can provide demographics here that support retail and commercial development in an area that's extremely hard to compete with tax-free New Hampshire. And I'm looking to, I just want to make sure that I'm not trying to tout or blow the economic development horn when, you know, the zoning review committee is unanimously not opposed, but on the different page than me.
Sure. Eric, do you want to go first on that one? I can make you go last.
Sure. Sure, you know,
As
throw
I,
the
as I
grenade
gaze
over.
across my screen, you're right there, buddy.
No problem. I mean, I think that there are economic development opportunities, and I'm totally on board with what you're talking about, Eric. And I think, you know, you look at it, the infrastructure is there. You've got water, you've got sewer, you know, you've got access to Route 3 and Middlesex Road. Everything is there. I think the biggest challenge or hurdle, and I'd like to see how we come up with this, is when I look at potentially, you know, having, if not the full 750 units being at that location, having, you know, 200 or 300 by right, that is when we start to look at it and say, well, yes, there's economic development opportunities, but there is a strain on our existing services that could happen. So, you know, that's my big thing. If I look at it and say, you know, let's say we had half or, you know, half or less of the 750 in there, you're looking at 375 units. If I could have 375 units built within a relatively short period of time, it would put a burden. I think our schools and some of those, there is some capacity there, but I don't think 375 units, we could handle that capacity. So, you know, I'm not averse to the economic development options that are there. The challenge I have is that unless we can grow that smartly and put those types of things so that it doesn't put a big impact on services all at once, I think that that's a risk that the town is not, they wouldn't have the appetite for that. And that's where I look at scenario A, having some of that space being in that area, and then, you know, presumably like 2/3 of it being outside of that. I think it kind of hedges some of our bets. That was the only thing that I was looking at, you know, relative to that.
So we'll look at
Scenario A, if I've got it correct in my mind, is the only one that includes the Pheasant Lane parking lot, and the capacity that they calculated there is 184.
Yep. And that's what I liked about it. I had this number in my head of, you know, less than 250. That's just what I had in my head, because saying, geez, if there's more than a third of that, I look at it and say, that's something that we would have to match. And once we do this by right, we don't have that ability to manage it.
I have one more question. I don't know if it was ever asked or answered. Does the MBTA community offer a rate of build as far as a percentage of existing home stock? So in other words, you wouldn't want to go in and put 750, you know, 350 homes in one whack. Is there some way to control that type of growth, even on some of these larger parcels? Is that allowed?
It would eliminate the by right requirement. Yeah. So the rules that they provided for municipalities to play by are the ones that you see here, which is basically controlling where your district is and how big it is.
but not the growth.
Not the rate of build, not the growth, not how many can go in over a certain period of time. Once the district has been defined and it's by right, you might have some regulatory and or design components where you'd say, you know, there might be architectural, there's setbacks, there's structures, there's heights, there's floor to area ratios. There's so many levers and tools that are going to come up with regards to conversation on how you'd like to, I don't want to say manage, but that's probably a good description, how you'd want to manage the developments or the proposals that the town might receive for site plan review, there's a lot of things that can be incorporated into your zoning.
And I think that's one of the reasons we really wanted to split this thing up as much as we could, so that we wouldn't be faced with, all of a
Right.
sudden, bang, you've got 300.
All at once.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. Exactly.
Eric, can I ask a question? Or actually, Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
please.
Maybe
Yes.
if Eric, maybe Bob knows the answer to this. So it's by right, I get it. But you talked about some levers that we do have. So one of the concerns that I would have, I mean, obviously the schools, I have that concern and public safety, putting all that, but we can't limit that. What about sewerage? So if I look at it and say, you know what, that's all sewerage. If I'm close to capacity there, if putting in more than 200 units, we don't have the sewerage capacity. Is that something where we could sit there and say, look, you're going to have to, Mr. Developer, you're going to have to come up with either a treatment plant on your own, or you're going to have to come up with another way, because we only have capacity for 200.
Yes, sir.
Is that something that is viable?
Yes, so that is part of your site plan review process. So
Okay.
the zoning is not going to require a municipality to have to make infrastructure connectivity investments just to accommodate what the zoning makes possible. The zoning makes it possible, but it would be up to the applicant to decide if they wanted to invest in an extension or expansion of that capacity, running new sewer line or changing the size of a line itself, or, as you mentioned, designing and implementing, a DEP approved package treatment plant, which has been the state's response when infrastructure concerns have been brought up, over and over again by municipalities in their conversations with the state about this legislation.
Thank you.
But what you can't do is say flat out, no, we don't approve this site plan because we don't have the capacity. You can
Right.
simply say, you need to, we're requiring you to do this.
Larry, your thoughts?
So it would be hard to imagine that this would not have a positive impact on economic development. As far as how much, I don't see how anyone would really know until you actually got into it and it started to happen. Then you would find out, which is why I think it's good that this is being broken up into a couple different sites, and we're tapping the brakes a little bit here, not stopping, but just extending the length of time that the whole process takes, so that we can monitor what goes on the positive frontier and protect us overloading the services that we currently have in play that these are going to require. So I was super concerned about that initially, and then I did talk to some people in town and ask some questions, and now I'm less concerned about it than I was, but it's still, I think Tyngsborough has to be really careful of not growing too quickly. And again, as I understand that the state is really only saying, you need to have zoning. No one needs to build anything. No one needs to do a thing. There doesn't need to be a unit here in play. We just need, our mission is just to make sure that the zoning is there. So if somebody does want to do this, they can. And then assuming that eventually stuff is going to happen, the three alternatives here to me seem really good. I do like the idea of putting stuff behind the Olive Garden. You're super close to Route 3. You're close to Mall of Nashua. You're right on Middlesex Road. That is going to drive more traffic, onto Middlesex Road, and commercial stuff there, and maybe fuel people wanting to put more stuff there, which would be a good thing, at least in my opinion. So I think it would be positive, and the degree to which it would be positive, we're going to figure it out as it starts to happen, and then we can kind of, take it from there.
Bob, to you real quick. Right now, where the deadline, I believe, is the end of next year to have this in place. If a bunch of communities are saying, all right, we're gonna use all our 40B spots, do you think at some point and if the state should kick back, would they extend the time limit to have everything in place?
Yeah, I don't really have an answer to that. I mean, I think it's a good question is, if all of these communities come in, close together, the state's capacity to review all of this in, some quick time period is just really not there, I don't think. And so whether that leads to extensions or not, I think it's going to just have to play out and we'll see.
Yeah, it's an
Eric might
extreme,
have a better take on this than me.
right. I mean, we're only making, assumptions or estimates. I think the state's decision or ability to make an extension with regards to the deadlines, as Bob said, would have to do with their ability to respond. So if a community has already submitted something for review and they don't receive a response for, let's just say, 4 months, right? That's a lot of time that the community could have been working on something, and maybe they are continuing to work on something, assuming that they're going to get a positive response from the state. If the state comes back with a negative response and a lot of the work that's been accomplished in the meantime, is for naught, I think that you'd have a good case at requesting from the state for additional time, because you can demonstrate a lot of effort that's been put towards it, and it's due to no fault of your own. You followed all the procedures and rules and regulations that they provided to you, and if they're giving you a new reason why they're going to be saying no, I would strongly advocate for an extension for you.
So with those thoughts, would it make sense? I don't know, we're playing the game right or not, to not file anything with them until the fall of next year?
No, I would not do that. So I think that you're going along the right process here, coming up with scenarios. You're in a pretty good time frame with regards to narrowing it down to a handful. I think that once I receive some additional feedback from the rest of the zoning review committee, if a clear winner comes up between scenarios A, B, and C, we can ask NIMCOG, what the response rates are and the process is for submitting sort of like for pre-approval of the district boundaries to the state, so that you can get that information as quickly as possible. I don't know what the turnaround times are yet, but they're only going to get longer as we wait.
Right, yeah. Joe, I don't believe we've heard from you yet.
Nope.
Hey, now you're off.
Sorry,
Now you're
no, yeah, sorry, keep going. I like it. I like all three scenarios. I probably am going to be a little bit partial to the scenario that takes the larger parcel behind Olive Garden. So if I had the larger parcel behind Olive Garden, and any of the other three would be fine.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have any other comments on this or anything else we've been discussing tonight?
Chair, just from a next steps, it sounded like we were at the point where we might want to have some public feedback. Do we have is that true? And if so, what is our game plan and next steps on that? I know that, there's a lot of things that we need to get done between now and spring town meeting, but I didn't know whether we were looking to tackle some of that soon. How soon are we looking to do that, and what does that look like?
Sure, I can answer that a bit, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Go ahead, Eric.
So I think, believe it or not, Springtown meeting is going to come up faster than we anticipate. So in order to coordinate public feedback, I think we want to be coordinating those outreach sessions at the end of September and October of this calendar year. So by the end of this month, I'd like to come up with an MBTA communities timeline, or at least a proposed schedule for Tyngsborough that outlines what we should be aiming for completing and when. I did have a meeting with several other communities this morning, and they provided, I guess, some initial, we had a discussion about, what should be happening and when in different communities. And I think Tyngsborough is pretty similar to Tewksbury in terms of where we're at in development. They've already come up with their timeline, so I'll be basing mine off of theirs.
Okay. So we obviously, we want, just to kind of review here, we certainly want language to legalize our multifamily and open space. So I think that's a must. But I don't think that's all that big of a deal at this point. And yes, we need to do some outreach. September, October, you think it'd be a time frame to do that. Do we have any other priorities that we would like to focus on for Springtown meeting? And just to back up a little bit, I really like it when we have something for every single town meeting, some sort of a change or an addition. I think it gets the community expecting something from us, and they're willing to see changes coming along. It shows that we're doing our job. So I wish we had something for fall. If we don't, we don't. But I think going forward, that's something that we ought to really strive for, to make sure that, okay, each town meeting is going to have some sort of a bylaw revision or a change. So I want to make sure that we try and get on track to do that going forward as this committee evolves in the future. A couple of things that we haven't really even talked about that might be some low-hanging fruit would be somehow to address some sort of climate change, renewable energy type of bylaw. One of the things that I was thinking about was charging stations in our parking lots. We really don't have anything to address that at all, other than saying to a developer, geez, would you mind putting some in? So maybe we could see what other communities are doing about that, that we could sort of adopt some legislation along those lines for our bylaws. Bob, do you have any thoughts on that at all?
Well, one immediate thought is Judy and I are actually working on that very issue with the town of Andover right now.
Oh, good. So that
We are looking at what other communities have done. We're looking at the issues. It's surprising how many background issues are there related to EV chargers. But we are intending to go to Springtown meeting, annual town meeting with Andover with language on that.
I'd be very interested to see how that.
Although
that's
we
going.
actually, yes, we're going to annual town meeting in the spring with that. So
Okay.
we've already started that research, so we can.
We do have some in town now. First parish meeting has some. We've got one up at the town hall. But I just would like to see something that, you know,
The highway department, we've got 440 has a ton.
Yeah.
My guess is we're probably in better shape than some communities, but I do think, Chaz, we could tie this. I know the town manager has a goal for this year to assess feasibility and funding options for solar panel installations and other energy saving measures at town hall, the new DPW garage, and additional town buildings. So, you know, it might be that we look at how we tie those things together. I think, you know, having a green community and being proactive in that regard is certainly something that we've done in the past and we want to continue, and how we codify that or make it more formal. I think that there's opportunities there.
Okay. Okay. And I know we're addressing it, but I don't know whether we need to actually have bylaws in place that would force developers into complying with our community needs. I know in the planning board, we run up against it all the time, and all we get really is lip service. And there's just no teeth in our master plan. And
Right.
I wish there was. So I'd like to have something that we can just say, okay, well, it's not just guidelines, it needs to be enforced. So those are some of the things that I've been thinking about.
Mhm.
All right, so we should set up our next meeting then.
I don't know that we talked about, so I know you were talking, Eric, in September, October, maybe having some public forum. One of the things that we can do, so during that time, we're getting ready for fall town meeting. And I know that there will be, my guess is that there will be some things on there that draw people. Things that warrant articles that might have some money involved. One of the things that we might want to consider is one, having a public hearing where we go through the items and we solicit feedback. But there may be an opportunity during the pre-town meeting to just solicit feedback from people. It's not going to be a vote or things like that, but you might get some people there that may have some thoughts. Whether we just give them a handout and have them fill something in and give us some feedback that way. There might be some other avenues in which we're going to get, and maybe we get some feedback in that mechanism.
Sure, I'm open to all options, whether it's a, day meeting, we carve out an hour or two over a weekend for people to participate, or if it's at pre-town meeting, we can address those as we march forward.
We want to try and put NIMCOG's proposal onto the town website once we've sort of finalized it a little more, or
Yes,
people could take a look at that. And
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we really need to be able to express to the town is that it's not etched in stone. It's not going to be built tomorrow. It's
Mhm.
just we need to provide spots in our town that this type of development can happen. And
Yes, so
all
I'm
we
glad
have-
that you brought that up, Mr. Chair. One of my tasks on my to-do list is to create a web page that's informing the community about everything from the very beginning. What is an MBTA community? Why are we doing this? To what has the town done so far? And here's the information and data that the town's working with that we've received from NIMCOG. Here's the zoning review committee's perspective on it. Obviously, that wouldn't be posted without you seeing it first. But trying to reflect the work that you've already put towards where you're at today. So yes, I would anticipate that would be up, I'm hoping significantly before a public input session. My goal is to have that up there by the end of this month.
Great. Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts moving forward, or? All right, so when do we want to get together again? And I think that's probably, we would want some sort of language from Bob and Judy at that point. Bob, what are we looking at for a time frame on that, do you think?
Well, I don't think that would take a lot of time, that's for sure. So where are we? We're on 8, so. I don't know what Judy's schedule is. I'm looking at my schedule right now, and this week it's totally booked, but the next couple of weeks are more open, so maybe in 2 or 3 weeks we could have something.
I'm thinking September something or other, not.
Oh, yeah, I don't think that won't be a problem. Yeah, that
Unless
won't be a problem.
Unless the committee thinks we need to meet before then. I mean, we're sort of, I know we have things to do, but we're not really under the gun to have anything done for the fall, so.
Right, I could be, since I'm not going to be soliciting input from the zoning review committee, I could be updating you based on what NIMCOG's answers are with regards to pre-approval and things like that as plans get submitted. So I will be asking the remaining members of the zoning review committee to formally say which of those scenarios I'm going to ask them to prioritize ABC, CBA, CAB, whatever it is, and then I'll take that data, which means that, like you said, sometime in the first 2 weeks of September might be a good time to meet.
Okay.
Would you likely meet again on a Tuesday night, or would that go to Wednesday, or? Are
We do have a
Tuesday?
key member of the planning board that's, wants to participate in this process, and Tuesdays are difficult for him to meet. So I would respectfully like to try to do the Wednesdays, because I'm pretty sure they're better for Jeremy, right, Chaz?
Yes, I believe you're right. Do we want to do like the 6th or the 13th or?
So I was looking at.
I think, and I'll have to double check, but I think one of the reasons we may have gone to Tuesday was Judy is not available on Wednesdays. I'm not sure about that. Let me double check with Judy.
All right, why don't we leave it open now, Eric, and you can, once we hear back from Judy's schedule, you can just send us out an email with a couple of possible dates that we can all agree on as a committee, so that we can get Adriana and we can get Jeremy back in the fold here.
Sure. When I get availability from Judy, I will create a doodle poll, which allows everybody to sort of like pick what days work best for them, and we'll try to maximize participation in the next meeting.
Okay. That sounds good.
And don't take offense, but I'm not available the 6th through the 16th, so if
I
I
won't-
say no, don't feel bad.
I won't take offense. Okay. Anything else we need to talk about then tonight? No, how about a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Do I get a second?
Second.
All those signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone, for your time as always. And we'll see you after Labor Day at some point.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Good night,
Appreciate it.
everybody.